The Missing Link is an amazing collaborative effort of many different talented ROM hackers and an excellent ROM hack of The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. The title is a play on words, referring to the missing link between the end of Ocarina of Time and the beginning of Majora's Mask, and also referring to the character Link, who goes missing during that time. If you can even comprehend that level of genius. It is a hack that I have been meaning to get around to for a while, not just because of the talent behind it, but because these types of ROM hacks do not show up very often. Ocarina of Time ROM hacks, as compared to something like Super Mario 64 ROM hacks, are very challenging to make. The process is much more involved, at least so I imagine, and requires much more planning and care because of how heavily they depend on a successive sequence of events to function as they do. So as you can imagine, these are very few and far between, and even the ones that may seem small or quaint in scope are worth holding on to, because we never know when we'll get another one. Even this one is 2 years old now, and the only reason I haven't gotten around to it until now is because I'm an idiot. But I'm getting a tiny bit smarter every day. Now, The Missing Link tells the story of Link searching for Navi after the end of Ocarina of Time, before inevitably getting lost in the Lost Woods, where he would inevitably be led towards Termina. During his quest, though, Saria's spirit informs him that a great and evil beast is kidnapping fairies and using them for horrific experiments to become more powerful. So Link embarks on a journey to slay the beast and liberate the fairies. Along the way, you meet many familiar faces from Ocarina and Majora, and many characters that are not familiar to either of those games. Even though this game takes a lot of cues from both of those games, there are a lot of new elements to differentiate it and make it its own thing. This is not just Ocarina of Time / Majora's Mask with a couple of new maps slapped onto it. This is a complete and cohesive experience that honestly kinda makes both the official games stronger as a result. This is what fan-made content should always aspire to, adding its own content while having enough respect for what's already there that they complement each other and add up to something better than they could be on their own. And one of the things I love the most about this ROM hack is how heavily it references little pieces of canonical lore and widely accepted fan theories. There's a book discussing the great warriors who become Stalfos and challenge any warrior who comes across them, referring of course to the Stalfos in Twilight Princess, who many believe to be the old Link from Ocarina and Majora. Is this how Link learned the way of the Stalfos in the first place, just in a random book on the shelf? Maybe. From an audio-visual standpoint, this hack is a knockout, to the point that it looks like it could be official. The visuals have been brought up to par with Majora's Mask, Link's model being updated, the UI having those fancier sprites, and with none of those nasty-ass pre-rendered 2D rooms. And on top of all of this, the game also has what sounds like an original soundtrack to lend a lot of validity and legitimacy to this world's decidedly oppressive aura. There is a fantastically potent element of darkness and gloominess to this hack that calls to mind the atmosphere of Majora's Mask, while retaining enough of the Ocarina-esque whimsy, striking a balance between these two directions so that neither one of them is overbearing, which is a great fit for a transitional game that takes place between these two games. You have the cursed Monktown Valley overrun with Redeads whose human souls are still stuck inside their bodies. This place is terrifying. Look at this, there's even a Redead running the shop. This area alone puts the hack's ability for world building on full display. There are symbols everywhere and buildings alluding to an ancient religion that has been scorned and defiled. The curse of the Redeads being put on the land as a response. It was this exact thing that made the worlds of Ocarina and Majora so much more believable, and without a doubt is one of the most impressive attributes of the Missing Link. The deep woods populated with Deku scrubs and Skulltulas, then you got the little ranch with Malon making sure Epona is okay. That's a really nice detail. Then of course there's the final dungeon, which has such a foreboding vibe to it as it slowly builds up the final boss. When you're designing a Zelda ROM hack, I imagine one of the biggest challenges is designing dungeons and puzzles and challenges that are just difficult enough to be engaging, but not so ridiculously obtuse that the average player will get stuck on it for 7 years. I imagine a lot of the challenge also comes from making sure you can't easily sequence break the game. The Missing Link hits those points pretty well, but it is worth noting that I did solve some puzzles the wrong way by spamming bomb shoes instead of using the hourglass of time thingy. Oh right, you can get an hourglass that lets you rewind time by 5 seconds and end up at an earlier position. An all-new Zelda dungeon quest item thingy. That is crazy, and easily one of the coolest things I've seen in any Zelda ROM hack. You also have the bunny hood from Majora's Mask, which allows you to run really fast and jump way farther. I imagine the combination of these two things could probably be very useful for speedruns. I wonder if anybody has looked into that. Another really cool thing is when you have full health, your sword gets a projectile beam, kinda like it does in the older games. It's a really cool thing, but it's not something you should get used to, because if you take one hit and lose it, the game instantaneously becomes way harder. As a whole though, the game is actually pretty easy to play through, even though the final boss is a pain in the dick. Environmental puzzles are never so obtuse that you'll just get completely lost. There are enough hints and clues to allow a perceptive player to put the pieces together and figure out what to do. Now aside from the main storyline, the game also has a lot of optional objectives. There are hidden heart containers scattered throughout the land. There's the magic bean guy who switched to Deku seeds. The Deku are now selling their own nut milk, which, well, now that I'm saying it out loud, it sounds kinda icky, to be honest. It definitely doesn't help that drinking it makes you unable to move. This game is nasty. There are brief quest lines, which aren't spectacularly huge, but there's just enough to add to the authenticity of the world. It is kind of a shame that this game can be beaten from start to finish in only a couple of hours, but that's pretty par for the course with respect to Ocarina of Time ROM hacks. So, presentation is great, story is faithful while still being original, gameplay is fun, and there are next to zero low points. The game is completely functional without any game-breaking bugs, and all of this on top of being a ROM hack of a game that has relatively few ROM hacks made of it. I think it definitely lived up to its reputation, and even 2 years later still stands above so many of its kind. So what's my final verdict on The Missing Link? Well, when you take all of those things into account, I guess you could call it the missing hack, because it's been missing from my channel for so long.